Now it's 8:05 and time for Any Questions. In the chair is Nick Clarke.
Welcome to Wellingborough near Northampton in the heart of England, where the guests of Wellingborough School, an independent institution with 770 pupils, boys and girls aged between 4 and 18. The school is just a couple of years short of its 400th anniversary. And our panel, an MP whose life and fortunes were transformed after she lost her parliamentary seat in 1979. 4 years later, she returned to the Commons as the member for Derby South, and less than a decade later, Margaret Beckett is deputy leader of the Labour Party. These days, she's involved in the battle to reform relations with the unions, watching perhaps uncomfortably as her own union, the T&G, hardens its resistance to John Smith's proposals on one member, one vote. Sir Marcus Fox has reached his elevated position as chairman of the Backbench 1922 Committee of Tory MPs without the spur of losing a seat. An MP since 1970, he has again in the past month been described as being more powerful than the Prime Minister. The 22 Committee seems to have enjoyed the influence backbenchers can wield when the government's majority is so slim, though he would certainly be reluctant to accept that he's one of the party's Knights of the Long Knives. Sally Hamwee was, until 2 years ago, a Liberal Democrat councillor in Richmond, a member of the party's executive, and a solicitor specialising in show business matters. Then she received the call to become a peer of the realm, nominated by Paddy Ashdown. She chose the title Baroness Hamwee, but still prefers plain Sally. Since the Lords doesn't pay that much for attendance, most plumbers would laugh at the fee, she keeps up her legal work and is also chair of Chiswick Family Rescue. And to keep the other three in check, who better than the scourge of the establishment, Paul Foote? For 13 years, his column in the Daily Mirror championed countless more or less unfashionable causes, particularly those of people he believed had been ill-served by the country's judicial system. Then came the day he turned his guns on his own employers, the Mirror's new post-Maxwell management. That particular column he had to hand out on the street to passers-by. Now he's behind a desk again at Private Eye, and he tells me he first appeared on this programme 25 years ago, along with a Mrs. Margaret Thatcher. Ladies and gentlemen, your panel. And could we have our first question, please?
Jacqueline Garrett. What is the panel's reaction to the proposal that local authorities should be able to charge fees from prospective adoptive parents? Do they consider this would be in the best interests of the children concerned?
Thank you, and this refers partly to a white paper on adoption which is coming out soon, and there has of course been a case about this week of a couple trying to adopt a baby of mixed race when they themselves are the same, which brought the whole matter of adoption into the public area. Margaret Beckett.
I think it's an appalling idea. I think that there are very many people who do want to adopt, who feel they have a great deal to offer to a child and who will be, whose approach will be considered and assessed, and it doesn't always work out happily. But I think that if it is possible for there to be a partnership established between a child that needs a home and people who want to give a child a home, that is a terrific thing. But the idea, obviously, a whole range of circumstances are taken into account when a decision is made about adoption. The idea that it should be a prerequisite to be able to pay a fee, I think that's dreadful.
Paul Foote.
Well, I agree entirely with that. And, of course, everybody everywhere nowadays is trying to find things to charge fees for. The whole society depends on whether you charge fees. The whole notion that runs through the society in which we live is that people should be judged according to whether or not they can pay fees or not, whether they've got money or not. If you've got money, you do well. If you haven't got money, you don't do well. The whole notion that you have a society where people come together and pay together so that all these matters, like adoption or anything else, are decided on social grounds, that is, on the basis of need, on the basis of what's good for the children and the parents involved. Those simple elementary points are simply chucked aside, and everybody says, well, let's see if they can charge fees. I hesitate to stress this point too much in a private educational establishment. But of course, the argument is exactly the same, and that is that there is better education, better health for those who can pay for it, and there's worse education and worse health for those who can't, and that applies to adoption as well. And so for that reason, and for every other reason, I think it's a thoroughly revolting proposition, which one would expect really to emerge from a government of the type under which we now suffer.
Marcus Fox?
Well, initially I would like to make Paul suffer a little more because this is only a proposal. It took my breath away when I heard about it, and there's a figure of £7,000 being mentioned. Just let's go a little carefully here. Now, can I just say this? As far as local authorities are concerned and social services, they're very quick on occasions to take children into care. But when it comes to adoption, my words, friends of mine, constituents, it can take forever. And there is something wrong with the system. And this case today horrifies me because there were a couple who, if any married people should be able to adopt, and particularly the type of child they wanted, I would have thought they were tailor-made for it. Oh no, we have to go through all this rigmarole. And the local authorities, you see, this is the dead hand. Contrary to what has been said previously, this is where you get this image from local authorities. They're going to make sure, and they will decide whether the couple are the right couple to adopt. Well, if there's a better way of doing this, and if it means if they can afford to ease the system a little bit, well, I'm not going to say no to that. But I will say this, there is no way in which a childless couple who want to adopt, it will not depend on their income, because actually whether they're good parents or not is nothing to do with their income. But I do think there's something wrong with the system, and it's been highlighted this week.
Sally Hamwee.
I'm appalled too. I'm appalled because the child's interests don't seem to have been put first. What is being put first is the financial interest. But I don't think it's even a very sensible financial idea, because the cost of keeping a child in care must be far more than the £7,000 that's been talked about. And to balance whether a couple can pay and perhaps put back the adoption of a child while the local authority is still paying for the child to be in a children's home where he may not be getting, almost certainly will not be getting, the same sort of care and support because it is simply not possible, not the same family environment. I think it is just daft financially. I think it's a terrible mix-up of priorities, and the child seems to have been left out.
Thank you. Our next question, please.
Peter Dunn. Does the panel agree that expecting trade unions to support a one member, one vote is akin to expecting a dodo to vote for its own extinction?
Paul Foot.
Well, questioner got a good laugh, didn't he? And trade unions, ha-ha, they're terribly funny. I mean, if we didn't have trade unions in this country, we would be very much worse off than we are now. One of the great tragedies of the last 10 years, 12 years or so, is the decline in the number of people that are members of trade unions. I mean, I know my own experience at the Daily Mirror was that it was really impossible to work as a decent journalist or a campaigning journalist of any kind in a situation where there was no trade union. What really worried me was there was no trade union, no focus against the enormous power of irresponsible wealth which is built up in these huge multinational companies, particularly in the media. You need balance at least against that. You need strength on our side, on the working people's side of the fence, so therefore you need trade unions. Now, on the question of one man, one vote, or one member, one vote, I'm against the Labour Party leadership, Margaret Beckett and others on this, because I think our side, that is the trade union side, our strength is our collective. That is when we do things together. I think the other side have wealth and power, inherited wealth, tremendous amount of wealth, the power that emerges from that wealth. We have no power except our collective strength. And the idea that we come to a decision and then together act on that decision is central to the notion of the formation of the Labour Party, to the very notion of trade unions themselves. And therefore, I think the way in which the trade unions now act in the Labour Party is quite proper, and I don't want to see that diluted, because I believe it would be diluted under the one member, one vote proposition. So I'm saying, up the trade unions. Let's have more powerful trade unions in this country. It won't be such a miserable place to live in.
To be fair to the questioner, there was no suggestion that unions should be abolished. It was simply the political connection.
No, but all the stuff about dodo and all the rest of that rubbish, I mean, that's the way people talk about it, card house, dodo, old bores, they're not like that at all. The people who should be talking about dodos are the people who run the society, the people at the top of the society. That's what he was suggesting in his question. I never attack questioners, you understand, but...
I dread it when you do. Sir Marcus.
Well, A dinosaur really is the right word to describe the expression we've just heard. Because the idea that one man can put his hand up and there is 1 million or 2 million votes have been cast, if that's democracy, well, I would like to see some better system, because it's not democracy. And the point is that through trade union legislation under this government over a considerable length of time, power has been handed back to individual trade unionists. And what is wrong with that? I would have thought that that is the way that it should go. And I noticed that union members have voted with their feet. They have moved away and decided that they can get a better deal by banding together in whatever way they want, or indeed opting out from whatever union. But we come really to the central point. The leader of the Labour Party, John Smith, is in real trouble. There are a number of people in this room who think we've got problems. Well, he's got different ones. And he's going to have to deal with this chap, Bill Morris. And he said, you know, those who pay should run the system. That's what he's saying. Well, now I look forward to this battle, and it's not good enough just simply to say you can have one vote. All John Smith wants is one vote to select a candidate. He's not really getting down to the nitty-gritty when it comes to all sorts of other things. So the principle is totally wrong. The idea somehow that people should be up there, they're afraid. They're afraid to let the rank and file actually exert the influence that they should honestly have.
Rather like the 22 committee has, you mean?
Oh, yes, the 22 committee. Well, there's 17 others besides me, but they do have the freedom, and I'm sure you've noticed over these last few months that two of them have perhaps used it quite often.
Who elects the Tory party chairman, actually? I think we should ask Sir Marcus that. Who elects the Tory party chairman? Sir Norman Fowler. Who elects him? Who elects the people that control the Tory party?
Well, I'll be very happy to answer that. It is in the power of the Prime Minister, of course. But down at the level of... well, at the level... We all understand...
That's filled everybody here with confidence.
Well, at the level of... Throughout our party organisation, there are elections to area chairman right through to the National Union.
Not the national chairman.
They have a voice. And if you are telling me that we should go to a system where, as the leader of the Labour Party, and God forbid the Prime Minister of the Labour Party, he is told who will be his ministers, depending on the vote. Margaret Beckett sits there because she got enough votes to be in the shadow cabinet. Well, I much prefer, if you've got a leader and you elect him, he should choose his team.
We'll leave Margaret Beckett till last on this one. Sally Hamwee.
Well, my loyalty to the Liberals was consolidated in the mid-70s when, as a very new member, I found that I was part of the process of the leadership election. As a very humble, new person in the party, I was one of the people who helped elect David Steele, and I felt that that was the right thing to do. I'm very glad still to be a member of the party, though I suppose some people might say I'm a dodo or a dinosaur too, because my current political job doesn't require election. That's not something that I'm proud of. I think that the current situation is quite a tragedy, because one would hope to be looking to the Labour Party to help modernise and democratise Britain, and if it's failing to do so internally, I don't think that it has, we can have a lot of confidence in it doing so for all of us. I think that the Labour Party and the unions have to extricate themselves from one another, and I'm not sure that it is entirely to the benefit of the unions to be seen to be so politically partisan as they are. I think that management and negotiations might be rather easier and smoother if they weren't immediately labelled with that political complexion. I think that it's very anachronistic, all this, and dodo, head in the sand, ostrich, whatever form of life you will, but I hope it's soon an extinct form of life.
We'll let the mixed ornithological metaphors pass. Margaret Beckett.
I think this whole conversation has been quite extraordinary. If I may say so to the gentleman who asked the question, his question was based on a false premise. He asked about how we could expect trade unions to support the principle of one member, one vote. How does he imagine trade unions themselves make their decisions? Precisely on that basis. That is the whole root and the essence of the democracy of the trade union movement as it is of their relationship with the Labour Party. And all we're talking about in the structure and the discussions that are being held at the moment is the framework and the precise mechanism within which that one member, one vote democracy will be exercised. Sir Marcus said it's ridiculous, the idea that one man should put his hand up and cast 1 million votes. It's not democracy. No, one man does do that. Someone who does cast a vote under our present system, which is what we're discussing in ways of changing it, under our present system, one person who casts a vote at the Labour Party conference does so on behalf of all those thousands and hundreds of thousands of people who have themselves cast their votes to decide the policy of their union or the views of their constituency party, as the case may be. Now, I know it's difficult for Sir Marcus to understand because they don't have votes at the Tory party conference, but that's the way it works when you have a democratic system. He also said those who pay should run the system, which does make me wonder who runs theirs, but that is, of course, a slightly separate debate. But what I thought was most outrageous was his remark about how union members have voted with their feet as if they'd turned away from their trades unions because they had in some way become disillusioned. The membership of trade unions has declined in large part because large numbers of their former members are on the dole where your government put them, Sir Marcus. But secondly, what I think is really disgraceful is that one of the worst things this government has ever done is in a decision they took a couple of weeks ago, where in the House of Lords they overturned a decision made by the courts and made it legal for an employer in effect to fine somebody for being in a trade union, to insist on offering their workforce contracts whereby they have to leave their union, and those who insist on staying in their union don't get pay increases when people who leave the union do. Nowhere in the free world would such a system be permitted except in this country. It is the antithesis of democracy. It's the kind of thing that has only ever previously been seen in dictatorships, and he should be thoroughly ashamed of it, and so should his whole party.
I'm not ashamed. I'm not ashamed at all. Can I say that I'm surprised to hear you say, Margaret, that suddenly, because there's been, presumably you're telling me everybody has a vote, but there's one man goes in there and actually casts the vote in the way that he thinks. Maybe a majority decide, but what about hundreds of thousands who, if they'd all got a single vote, could well sway conference decisions? But no, I'll tell you what I'm opposed to. I am opposed to the way in which your party used the trade union movement, the closed shop, to force people out of employment, to maintain certain disciplines on industry, which didn't allow us to be competitive, and dare I say, in the when the history is written, the way that they behaved in the early 50s, 60s, and 70s will, in fact, be very interesting reading, because it certainly did not help the prosperity of this country.
I think an awful lot of people in this country would like to be living in the early 50s and 60s now, when everybody had a job, when the health service was being expanded, when the schools were getting better and better, when most people in the country could look forward to a better life for their children than they can now. Most people in this country now would like to be living in such a society in these times which Sir Marcus says is bad. And when he says that somebody gets up and decides 1 million, of course that vote's been gone right through the union all the way up to the top. But what about all those people in the boardrooms that decide just on the basis of their wealth that masses of people are going to be sacked, decide the prices that we have to pay in the shops? Where's the democracy there? The whole of this so-called private enterprise, capitalist system, whatever you want to describe it, depends on undemocracy, the opposite of democracy. People having power because of their wealth, which they've inherited in the main. That's what marks out this society. And those few areas where there's some kind of democracy, when people like Sir Marcus come and says he wants to liberate trade unionists, he hates trade unionists. The whole of those employers hate trade unionists. They want to weaken trade unionists. That's the whole point of the Tory laws.
I don't hate trade unionists. I've got several thousand in my constituency.
Right, Sally Hamwee would like a word. Sally Hamwee.
Well, I just think that this discussion with the right and the left, liking the holes that they are in and digging ever deeper, is precisely an example of what I was saying about how we need to modernise our politics.
Can I'm going to go back to the... I'm going to go back to the...
I could ask Sally Hamwee how she voted in the House of Lords when the government put forward that amendment.
I didn't think that there was anything on this issue on which I would agree with Margaret Beckett, but that comment about that piece of legislation, I do wholeheartedly agree with her on.
Good.
Can I ask one specific question? I'm going to go back to the question in a minute, but I'd like to ask Margaret Beckett one thing. The question refers specifically to whether the union should support a proposal on one member, one vote. There is one on the table from John Smith for at least one member, one vote on choosing candidates. Are you happy about that? Would you say to unions, support that wholeheartedly?
I've already pointed out that trade unions do support the principle of one member, one vote.
For choosing candidates?
They support it. It is the essence of how they make their decisions. They're not like these people who sit in boardrooms and make decisions in private. As
But they don't like John Smith's proposals,
They make those decisions. We are all looking at the exact framework within which that principle operates. The trade union movement, and this of course is what the Conservative Party hates, the trade union movement and the Labour Party have a long-standing relationship. They are affiliated members of the party's organisation. That's why they make their contributions. They have a role to play. They have a right to have a voice because they belong to us and we belong to them. We are part of the same movement, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I would say one other thing about it. It's known, it's voluntary, it's strictly controlled by law, unlike the system within which Sir Marcus operates, and nobody can accuse us of conducting it in secret.
Let's hear what Peter Dunn, the questioner, has to say.
It seemed to me, when I posed the question, that it was rather a strange and very idealistic world that we live in when we expect people whose sole source of power is their block vote to use that very block vote to lose that source of power. Seems to me most extraordinary.
Thank you very much. Let me remind you that if you wish to take part in this discussion, any answers after the Saturday edition of the programme is, as usual, going to be taking place, and the telephone number to ring, as usual, will be 071 580 4444. Please do call with your views. Let's go on to the next question.
Nick Elborn. Now that relief parcels from Pakistan are due in Stockport, what would the panel put in a parcel for John Major?
Thank you. There are people in Pakistan who are keen to send fruit and vegetables, I think, to people in Stockport who they believe may be in desperate need of them. But now the question refers to John Major. Marcus Fox.
Oh, yes, you would ask me first, wouldn't you? Well, I mean, there's no doubt what I would put in that little parcel. I would put with him a sort of lucky emblem. I would put in some really a tough Yorkshire message, which is that we don't give up the fight. And he knows that if he just sort of perseveres, that's all. The economy's coming right, and I wish him the best of luck. And on top of all that, I should put inside it a cricket bat so that when he feels a bit dismayed, he can go out and knock the stuffing out of everybody who's been saying rude things about him.
I thought you were going to suggest us an inscribed wristwatch for a moment, but... Margaret Beckett.
I think it would just be one simple message, that relief is at hand. It's easy for you to solve all your problems. Just call a general election.
Sally Hamwee?
Well, I suppose since this is a food parcel, fruit for the vitamin C for some more energy, vegetables for the fibre, maybe a brighter colour suit, and I dare say some people would say a ticket for a long holiday on his retirement.
And finally, Paul Foote.
£500,000 and a Cyprus orange and a note marked "Love from Azil."
Next question, quickly.
Right. Nargis Ajas, in the light of changes in the legal system proposed by the Royal Commission on Criminal Justice, should a defendant's automatic right to trial by jury be abolished?
Thank you for that question. The Royal Commission on Criminal Justice has put forward a huge range of ideas, one of them being that a defendant's automatic right to trial by jury might not necessarily be in place. Sally Hamwee, you're from the legal profession. What do you think?
Well, the Royal Commission was established in the wake of the reversal of the decision about the Birmingham Six, and I think that its main objective was to address the loss of public confidence in the legal system. And so it seemed to me a rather odd proposal in that context that a jury trial might not be as widely available as it is now. I think I have a sort of fundamental gut reaction to it being wrong to restrict a right to trial by jury, particularly if, as it seems from the report, This is intended to be an efficiency saving. The hand of the Treasury may be there as well. I think that efficiency could be achieved, money could be saved by other measures. This may not be as fundamental a measure as it has been projected in the press. It's not a complete ban on jury trial, and we're only talking about a certain band of offences. But, for instance, to decriminalise certain minor offences could save us money, to have administrative reforms, to enable, to help judges to timetable cases, perhaps some limited plea bargaining. There are all sorts of other measures which I think would probably save more than this, which seems to me to go to the heart of what we prize in our legal system.
Thank you. Margaret Beckett.
I think that the Royal Commission, which was set up in the aftermath of some very worrying miscarriages of justice, does seem to have, as its work has gone on, to have looked rather more at the cost and efficiency side, and perhaps in some respects a little gone astray. I think broadly it's a huge report, as was said at the outset, and broadly there are quite a lot of things in it that I think we could all welcome. But if there's one thing in it that I think is profoundly mistaken and can't possibly be accepted, it is this suggestion that we should abandon the right to trial or restrict the right to trial by jury. There seems to have been a suggestion or a mood that this was something which was costly and something which was perhaps increasing, but actually I understand that the number of people who are opting for trial by jury has actually fallen substantially, almost by 30% over the last 4 or 5 years. So there isn't even an efficiency or cost-cutting justification for it at the present time. Even if there were, I would be opposed to it. But as it is, it does seem to me to be a quite anachronistic proposal in a number of other things which might contribute to a better judicial system, and certainly I couldn't possibly support it.
Fulford?
Yes, I think appearing on this program, I think the great nightmare one has is that every single person will agree, especially when you have people like Sir Marcus Fox on the program with you. There's a terror that you might agree with him. And I think if I could be so bold as to push the question a little further, I mean, I think everybody thinks, that it would be monstrous to restrict the right to trial by jury, because the juries are a democratic counterweight to an otherwise very hierarchical and bureaucratic legal system. They do represent people plucked from the cross row, ordinary people coming to put their views and their ideas, and usually those are far more progressive than those of judges and barristers and so on. So the jury is absolutely vital. But can I just say another thing about the Royal Commission? I worked on the Daily Mirror as a journalist, specialising perhaps in not specialising, but just being forced to specialise in people who have been wrongly convicted. I mean, while I was there over 13 years, I must have every week had 5 or 6 letters from people who said they'd been wrongly convicted, most of whom I came to believe. It's a very, very serious problem. It's not a minor problem at all. And I was looking forward to the Royal Commission proposing a court of last resort, that is, a court to which people could go to after these mistakes have been made, or when they think a mistake has been made. And I hoped that the jury system, that is the idea of plucking people from the cross row, might be extended to the notion of a court of last resort. In other words, that you would have a court on top of all the legal courts that now exist that would look at cases where people thought a mistake had been made, but would investigate the thing from the start in a different way to the way in which it had been investigated in the beginning, because most of the mistakes are made in the way in the issue has been investigated by the police at the beginning. Most of the mistakes that have taken place start there. And therefore many of us were hoping for a court of last resort which has been proposed, with lay members which have been proposed, but crucially with its own investigatory powers. That is, powers to look itself at all those statements and decisions that were taken right at the beginning of the case. Go back and talk to the people on the ground and find out what happened, and if something went wrong, be able to put it right. Now, the real sadness for me, for the Royal Commission, is that they proposed all these things, but they proposed that the investigations should still be undertaken by the police force which started in the first place.
But there is an independent oversight introduced, isn't there, or proposed?
Well, not in investigatory oversight. There's an oversight in the same way as there is on the Police Complaints Authority now. The people on the Police Complaints Authority have an oversight. That is, they can look at the police investigate themselves, And then there's an oversight over that, one or two people. But the investigation itself, that is the going to the sources of the information, is left to the people who made the mistake in the first place. So we have police investigating themselves in the Police Complaints Authority. That's the awful truth. And the dreadful situation is that the Royal Commission has proposed that we should have a court of last resort in which the investigatory power should be the people who made the mistake in the first place looking at themselves.
Thank you, Sir Marcus Fox.
Well, did I hear Paul Foote say that he worked on the Daily Mirror? I thought he spent more time on the picket line. Can I
have to do a bit better than that,
I will
really.
I will ignore all the other 325 recommendations that the Royal Commission have put forward. The interesting thing about this commission, all the eminent people on it, and there was the very broad spread of people, agreed unanimously with all these recommendations apart from one. That must tell us something. Now, what I deplore is the long, drawn-out procedures before the British law works for a lot of people, and particularly those on low incomes who depend on help, and it is, I think it's really unforgivable that our system works in that way. So I want to look very carefully at these proposals about the jury, because I have seen too many cases where just to escape the sentence from magistrates, and most of those sentences are given by magistrates, they automatically go to a jury. And what happens? Just before they go into court, they plead guilty. And what a waste of time and money. So I'm not going to dismiss this, because I think there is something in this that is worthy of consideration.
Margaret Beckett.
I thought for a minute I was going to agree with Marcus Fox, but then I discovered that I most certainly was not. In fact, I want very strongly to disagree with him. I do agree with him, absolutely, that it's terribly wrong in our system that there are all these delays and that people are kept hanging about. But one of the studies that's been done recently has shown that something like 70% of people who plead guilty at the last minute have only just seen their barrister for the very first time on the day that they're going into court. They've been hanging around for months and for ages, waiting, and that's the point when they see and get advice from their barrister. Yes, of course, there are lots of things we should do to speed up and make more efficient and effective the way that our system of justice works, but taking away the right to jury trial isn't one of them.
Sally Hamwee would like to come back.
Yes, it's a slightly different point, but I hope that Marcus Fox, who seems to be very concerned, and quite rightly so, that everybody should get justice and should have, no doubt, their civil rights as well as their criminal rights properly protected, I hope we'll go back to Westminster and argue again against the current legal aid reductions.
A question for another day, and maybe not the one that's coming up next, please.
Charles Linfield. Does the panel consider that shared sovereignty in Northern Ireland between Britain and the Irish Republic offers a possible solution to the continuing problem of violence and terrorism in the province?
An idea floated by Dick Spring, the Irish Foreign Minister. Marcus Fox.
No, I don't think that that proposal was helpful in any way. I think that it infuriated the people of Northern Ireland, and that is not the way forward. I think we're all dismayed that the progress that seemed to be happening suddenly has stalled again. And one of the sad things is to try and get the different people in Northern Ireland to talk, just to talk together is something that we just pray for. I believe that until the government of Southern Ireland, of ERA, is prepared to sort of give and to understand that the Ulster, Northern Ireland, is a part of the United Kingdom, there is no way that they can be forced into a sharing of sovereignty. It can come about in a much simpler way, but there's got to be more give and understanding on the part of the people in Southern Ireland. That's the way I stand.
What do you think about Mr. Spring's particular point about a referendum of all the people of Ireland at this time?
Well, I didn't get beyond his first suggestion about shared sovereignty, because there is no way we can have a referendum if we're going to alienate our friends in Northern Ireland, in Ulster, who are as British as we are. It's their choice. We are not going to move away from them and say it's going to be the hands of someone else. When they vote and ask for whatever it is, then if that's their decision, we will honour it. But we're not going to impose it upon them.
Margaret Beckett?
It's my impression that there are growing numbers of people in every part of Ireland who are desperate now to see some kind of breakthrough and some kind of light in all these difficulties. And as Sir Marcus said, it does appear that yet again the talks have stalled, and I think one of the comments that Dick Spring made was that if that stalling continued, if the talks just ground completely to a halt and there was no further progress, he thought that vacuum would be more dangerous even than what has gone before. And that, I think, is a very frightening prospect. And I do think that the people of Northern Ireland and the people of Éire are owed more from politicians than, and I'm not meaning to suggest that Sir Marcus has necessarily done this, but I do think they're owed more than snap reactions. I do think they're owed serious consideration of anything that's put forward. It does seem to me that in a world where not so very long ago the Berlin Wall came down, where in South Africa they're talking about the possibility of everyone being able to vote and of some form of government and power sharing where people can work together, surely we can't, in these islands, say there's only one place in the world where there's no solution that we can discuss, and that is in Northern Ireland.
Sally Hamwee.
I think the best hopes for Ireland are Mary Robinson and Dick Spring, who seem to me to have come fresh to the issues, carrying no baggage. Their PR may not be wonderful, but it is a delight to hear them say what may have been the unsayable. Dick Spring has been prepared to say that the territorial claim is not sacrosanct. Almost all, I think, of the Northern Irish people want talks to resume. And Mayhew must get the parties together. He really must, because Paisley and Hume can't have a veto over the future of Northern Ireland. I think that new ideas have got to be talked about, because the old ones haven't produced the solution. The sovereignty, of course, should be with the people. I mean, they need to take on the responsibility and be given the opportunity to take the decisions and to run their own lives. But new ideas must be welcome.
Thank you, Paul Foote.
Well, I suppose I've got a snap reaction, but for years I've always thought that Britain should get out of Northern Ireland. I can't understand why Britain is in Northern Ireland. Nothing that Britain has ever done in any part of Ireland has ever done any good to Ireland or to Britain. It seems to me we've had 400 years of colonial rule there, which have been rotten for everybody concerned, and I can't understand why we don't get out. The state of Northern Ireland is a rotten state. It's a bastard state pushed together to try and get out of the business of giving Ireland independence in 1922, when it should have been given independence in 1922. It survives entirely on sectarian differences, on the Orange supremacy, on the Protestant supremacy. That's what we're propping up there. And the only reason it survives is precisely because we do keep our troops there, and because Britain is there. And once that prop is removed, it seems to me there's a possibility that the people of Ireland can get together and live together in a friendly and harmonious way. There's no prospect whatever of that happening as long as we provide the prop to a sectarian state in Northern Ireland.
And we've time for one more question.
Margaret Marshall. Magistrates have said it is okay for a childminder to smack a child in her care. Were members of the panel smacked when they were children? And if so, how has it contributed to the people they are today?
Reasonably concise answers, please. Sally Hamwee.
I don't remember it, but my mother tells me that the worst thing that ever happened to her was when she'd found that she'd smacked me. It had a more profound effect on her, I think, than it did on me. Violence, I think, can breed violence. I hope I am not a violent person, but I think it is very often an expression of parental tension and not discipline, and it doesn't seem to work.
Paul Foote?
Well, the answer is yes. I went to an antediluvian school rather like this one. Oh, I'm so sorry. Not remotely similar to this one, where part of the culture was for boys of 17 to lash into boys of 15 and 14 with canes. You know, it was the sort of thing that made Britain great and governed countries like Kenya and Cyprus and so on. I didn't take part in the actual beating myself, I can say that. So I agree entirely with Sally. You know, we really can't base the way in which we grow up children on physical violence. And it's like people who say the answer to murder is to murder someone else. You know, the answer to violence is to be violent. Seems to me absolutely ridiculous. Violence never solves anything, least of all when children are involved.
Margaret Beckett.
My mother was an experienced school teacher. A word or a look could stop a child at 50 paces.
Well, I think the question should be answered as well. This related particularly to...
We were not smacked. The necessity never arose. You froze in your place. Oh, I don't mean because I was such a good child. I mean simply because my mother had such a power of personality. When my mother said stop, believe me, you stopped.
Marcus Fox.
Well, my mother was not a teacher, but she could certainly give you the sort of look that would freeze you. But, no, I was smacked. And we're talking about small children. I cannot believe that any parents can put their hands on their heart and say that they have not just touched a child at some stage. I don't believe it does them any harm. We smacked our two. They've grown up to be wonderful children, but I'm obviously a chap who needed that sort of treatment because I got the odd smack at school as well, and I'm admitting it. Only once it was with a cricket bat.
Very quickly, last question, but another last question.
Shelley Young, what is the point of Parliament?
What is the point of Parliament? Sally Hamwee.
It should be to represent the people and do it properly.
That really was brief. Margaret Beckett?
Parliament is a place where men and women who are chosen by the people in the localities that they represent are able to go along and express their point of view and cast their vote on their behalf, rather like trade union leaders do on the behalf of their members, actually.
Paul Foot, briefly.
I agree with all the cliches. The only problem is it doesn't have power. If it had the power, it would be absolutely wonderful. People imagine that Parliament has the power, but unfortunately the people who have the power are the people who have the money. And on the whole, the people who have the money control what's done in Parliament. If it was the other way around, I'd be a great supporter of it.
Marcus Fox.
Our democracy is admired throughout the world. We've been through difficult times, we've survived, and we shall continue to do. It's based upon one man, one vote, and I've been very happy to represent my constituents for 23 years.
Thanks very much indeed. Thanks to Wellingborough for having us. Next week is a special programme in Bristol as part of the BBC Radio On show, for which tickets are still available, I'm informed. Don't miss the chance to come along and listen to Teresa Gorman, Professor Julian Legrand, Rabbi Julia Neuberger, and Keith Vaz. But for the time being, from all of us here, goodbye.
Any questions came from Wellingborough in Northamptonshire. In the team were Margaret Beckett MP, Paul Foot, Sir Marcus Fox MP, and Baroness Hamwee. Nick Clarke was in the chair, and the producer was Nick Utechin. There's a chance to put your views on the subjects discussed in this programme in Any Answers, presented by Nick Clarke at 2:02 tomorrow. The lines are open from 12:30 tomorrow lunchtime, and the number to ring is 071 580 4444. Now with news of this week's Europhile, here's Gordon Clough.
For centuries, French and German soldiers have been meeting on the battlefields of Europe, not in the friendliest of spirits. But now they're working together, drilling together, sharing barrack rooms and eating in the same mess. And any disagreements seem to be mainly about the food.
The food here is unfortunately German.
What we eat here, that's not food.
What I don't like, that's noodles every day, for example. Some different kinds of cheese, maybe, would be nice.
Europhile this week goes on parade with the Franco-German Corps, intended to be the nucleus of a European integrated army. But if there's a degree of military harmony between France and Germany, in other respects the two countries seem to be drifting apart. We'll be examining the reasons from both sides of the border. In Budapest, we visit a rest home for out-of-work communist statues, and why the Spanish bewail the passing of El Dorado more than most of its viewers.
Europhile, tomorrow morning at 11:30.